The badge reader at the entrance to Sublevel 9 had a little green light that blinked whenever it was happy, and right now it was very happy, which was how Marcus Reeve knew something was wrong. Nobody was supposed to be down here at 3 in the morning. He was only here because the overnight monitoring shift paid time and a half, and his daughter's braces did not pay for themselves, and Vought International, for all its glass towers and hero parades and 11-figure market cap, did not offer dental. He swiped in. The green light blinked. The door side open on hydraulics that cost more than his house. The lab beyond was the kind of place Vought did not put in the brochures. Down here, under the gleaming Manhattan campus where tourists paid $40 to photograph a wax Homelander, the company kept the parts of itself it could not sell. The failed compounds, the leaking test subjects, the projects that existed only as line items, disguised as something dull. The current dull line item was called Aperture, and Marcus had never been briefed on what it did, only that it drew enough power to brown out 3 city blocks when it ran, and that it was never, ever supposed to run at night. It was running at night. The chamber at the center of the lab, a ring of black-cased machinery the size of a subway car, humming at a pitch that made his fillings ache, was lit from within by a sick, bruise-colored glow. The technicians who should have been asleep in the on-site dorms were instead clustered at their stations, and the reason they weren't moving, Marcus realized with a slow and terrible clarity, was that they had been told not to. A woman in a charcoal suit stood at the observation rail with her hands folded behind her back, watching the ring the way you'd watch a stock ticker. He didn't know her name, he knew her type. Vought grew them in the same vat they grew everything else. "Ma'am," said one of the technicians, "the aperture's holding, but the draw's spiking. Whatever's on the other side it's pushing back." "Pushing back," the woman repeated, as if tasting the phrase for PR liability. "Log it as active response. Pushing back sounds like it has feelings." That was the last normal thing anyone said. The ring screamed. Not metaphorically. A sound tore out of it that was mechanical and organic at once, like a jet engine chewing meat, and the bruise light went white, and every screen in Sublevel 9 filled with the same 3 characters over and over in a font nobody had programmed. A symbol that looked like a stylized skull with a downward chevron, stamping itself across the monitors faster than the eye could follow. Then the light collapsed inward, and something stepped out of it. Marcus would spend the rest of his life, which, it turned out, would be short, trying to describe what he saw, and failing. It was a man, roughly, in the way that a tank is roughly a car. It wore armor the color of old blood and green weathered metal, plates layered over plates, scarred and scorched by things that had no business existing. It did not stumble out of the aperture the way a man crossing dimensions should stumble. It walked out, deliberate, unhurried, as if it had been walking toward this exact spot for 10,000 years, and had merely rounded the final corner. It stopped. The helmet turned. A slow, mechanical sweep of the room, and behind the visor there was no face, only a suggestion of eyes that had been staring into hell so long that hell had stared back and blinked first. The woman in the charcoal suit, to her credit, did not panic. "Containment," she said. "Now." The security detail on Sublevel 9 was not campus rent-a-cops. Vaught's black sites were guarded by ex-Special Forces contractors with weapons Vought was not legally supposed to own, and there were 6 of them, and they were very good, and they opened fire in a disciplined overlapping pattern that would have shredded a normal man into a red mist inside of 2 seconds. The armored figure did not become a red mist. It became a blur. What happened next happened in the time it took Marcus to inhale. The figure crossed the lab in a lunge that folded the distance to nothing, and it took the nearest contractor's rifle out of his hands and used it, not the bullets, the rifle, the physical object, to end him, in a way that Marcus's brain refused to fully process, and merely filed under wet. Then it was among them, and the disciplined overlapping fire pattern dissolved into a horror show, and the last thing any of the 6 professional killers understood was that they had, for the first time in their careers, met something for which killing was not a job but a nature. It moved through them the way a scythe moves through wheat, and it did not hurry, and it did not slow, and when it was done it did not even breathe hard, because Marcus was fairly sure it did not breathe at all. The woman in the charcoal suit was already moving toward the exit, phone to her ear, saying, "This is Sage. I need Tower on the line. And I need it 30 seconds ago. Sister Sage. Marcus knew the name now. The smartest person alive, they said. Smart enough, apparently, to run. The figure did not chase her. It turned instead toward the wall of screens still stamping that skull and chevron symbol into the dark, and it regarded them the way a wolf regards a fence, and then it regarded the room full of dead men, and the ring of machinery still smoking behind it, and last of all it regarded Marcus Reeve, who had not moved, who had not fired, who was pressed against the badge reader with its cheerful little green light, and had wet himself somewhere around the second death and not noticed. The visor held on him for one long, terrible second. Then it moved past. It did not kill him. Marcus never understood why, and he was too grateful and too broken to ask the question that a braver man might have asked, which was, what does it kill then, if not the man cowering by the door? He would learn the answer. Everyone would, but not tonight. Tonight the armored thing walked to the ruined aperture, tore a panel off its housing with one gauntleted hand as easily as peeling foil off a yogurt cup, studied the dead machinery inside with an attention that was almost patient, and then straightened, and turned toward the stairwell that led up through the levels, up toward the gleaming tower, up toward the city that had built a religion out of monsters and sold tickets to the sermon. And it began to climb. Vought would spend the next 6 hours doing what Vought did best, which was deciding what had happened before it decided what was true. In a boardroom 40 floors up, a very small number of very well-compensated people would sit around a table and construct reality, and the first thing they'd construct was a name for the thing, because a thing without a name is a thing you cannot control, and control was the only god this company had ever actually worshipped. But that was later. In the immediate aftermath, in the smoking dark of Sublevel 9, there was only the truth, and the truth was the thing every corporation like Vought spends its entire existence trying to bury. That they had reached into the dark, looking for a weapon to own, and the dark had handed them one, and the weapon had a mind, and the mind was not for sale. If you're the kind of person who wants to see exactly how far this goes, Vought's gods against a thing that can't be bought, branded, or buried, do the channel a favor and subscribe, and drop the next crossover in the comments. Any universe, any character, name them both and I'll bring them here. All of this written by me. Now, back to the man in the armor and the tower he's climbing. The boys heard about it the way the boys heard about everything, through the cracks. In a hideout that smelled of stale coffee and gun oil, and the particular despair of men who had been losing to a corporation for years, Mother's Milk was awake at 4 in the morning, because was always awake at 4 in the morning, because sleep had stopped being a thing that visited him around the time he'd started keeping a wall of red string. He was cross-referencing a Vought power consumption anomaly, a brownout across 3 blocks of downtown Manhattan, unlogged, unexplained, against a pattern he'd been building for 8 months, when his phone buzzed with a message from a contact inside Vought's medical logistics, who was very underpaid and very frightened. The message was a photo. It showed a body bag. It showed 6 body bags. It showed a requisition form for 6 body bags filed under a project code didn't recognize, at a sub-level he hadn't known existed, and a second requisition, this one made his coffee go cold in his hand, for a biohazard-rated containment cell, rated for physical output exceeding Homelander class. Homelander class. There were, in the entire recorded history of Vought, a vanishingly small number of things rated Homelander class. There was Homelander. There was Soldier Boy, before he'd gone into the ground and then, briefly and catastrophically, come back out of it. There was the number that Sister Sage was, in a different way. That was the list. That was the whole list. And now there was a 6th body bag, and a cell rating that shouldn't exist, and a brownout, and a black site nobody was talking about. Sat very still in the dark for a moment. Then he got up and went to wake Butcher, and it was a measure of how bad things had gotten in this city. Homelander unbound, doing his cruelty in the open now, the crowds cheering him for it. Vought's people installed in the government like a tumor with a comms strategy. That MM's first thought, walking down that hallway, was not "this is dangerous." His first thought was, finally. Because the boys had spent years hunting for the one thing that didn't exist. A weapon that could actually kill Homelander. Soldier Boy had been the closest they'd ever come. And Soldier Boy had been a monster in his own right. A Cold War relic who'd have leveled the city to win. They'd needed something that could beat the worst man alive without becoming him. They had never found it. Had privately stopped believing it existed. And now there was a black site full of dead professionals, and a symbol nobody could identify stamped across a wall of screens, and something Vought itself had rated above their own flagship god. And it was, at this very moment, climbing a stairwell toward the top of the tower, toward the manufactured heaven where the seven lived, wearing armor the color of old blood, and answering to no one, no company, no cause, no leash. Butcher was awake before even reached the door. He always was, when it mattered. "Talk to me," Butcher said. "Something got out at a Vought site tonight," said. "Killed a full contractor detail. Vought's calling in Sage. And they rated it, Butcher." He held out the phone. "They rated it above Homelander." For a long moment, Billy Butcher looked at the photo, and something moved behind his eyes that hadn't moved in a long time. Something that in a better man might have been hope, and in Butcher was closer to hunger. "Well," he said softly, and the grin that spread across his face was the worst thing in the room. "Ain't that a lovely bit of Christmas?" Up in the tower, 40 floors above the dead men and the smoking ring, an alarm no one had ever needed before began, very quietly, to sound. And on the stairwell, climbing, unhurried, unstoppable, the thing that Vought could not name kept coming, one deliberate step at a time, toward the gods it had come to unmake. The boardroom on the 99th floor had been designed by a firm in Copenhagen to project, in the words of the design brief, serene, inevitable authority. It had a table carved from a single slab of Carrara marble, chairs that cost $11,000 each and were somehow still uncomfortable, and a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the Manhattan skyline like a thing Vought owned, which, increasingly, it did. At 6 in the morning, the light coming through that window was the color of weak tea, and it fell across a table full of people who had not slept and were, every one of them, doing the frantic internal math of whether tonight was the night they got fired, killed, or both. At the head of the table sat Ashley Barrett, CEO of Vought International, and she was pulling out her hair. Literally, she had a bald patch now, a real one, tucked at her crown where the extensions covered it, and under sufficient stress her hand drifted up on its own, and found a strand and pulled, and the tiny bright pain of it was the only thing in her life that felt like control. She had pulled 3 hairs since sitting down. The morning was young. "Somebody," Ashley said, in the tone of a woman reading her own eulogy, "is going to explain to me, in words, using the mouth, what is in Sublevel 9. Sister Sage did not look up from her tablet. Sage never rushed, and the not rushing was its own kind of intimidation, because everyone in the room knew she was the smartest person alive, knew that she'd calculated all of their reactions before they had them, and knew that she'd chosen not to bother pretending otherwise. She had a coffee going cold beside her. She was, at this moment, the only person at the table who was not afraid, and that was somehow worse than if she had been. Aperture, Sage said, was an energy transfer program. Officially, it was researching dimensional membrane physics for clean power applications. She swiped. A frozen frame appeared on the wall screen, the armored figure, mid-stride, the camera catching it a half-second before the feed had died. Unofficially, we were trying to build a door and find out if anything useful lived on the other side of it. And Ashley pulled another hair. "Something useful lives on the other side of it," Sage said, "for a given value of useful." The frozen figure filled the wall. In daylight, even the second-hand daylight of a security still, it was worse than the night footage had suggested. There was a wrongness to the armor, a design language that belonged to no earthly military, plates over something that pulsed faintly beneath, and that skull and chevron symbol embossed on the chest like a brand. It did not look like a man in a suit. It looked like a thing that had been poured into a shape and then set out to cool. "We have," Sage continued, 1,311 frames of footage before every camera below level 4 failed. In those frames, it killed 6 former Delta and SAS contractors. Total elapsed time, weapons free to last casualty, 9 seconds. She let that sit. 9 seconds. For context, the fastest documented kill spread we have on Homelander in an uncontrolled scenario is 11. The silence in the room acquired a new texture. "So it's a soup," said the head of legal. A man named Grant whose entire function was to translate atrocity into liability. It's a rogue soup. We say it's a rogue soup. We've got the playbook for a rogue soup. It's not a soup. Sage finally looked up, and her patience with Grant was a thin and visible thing. There's no V in it. There's no V anywhere near it. We didn't inject it. We didn't grow it. We didn't make it. It came through the door already finished. She tapped the screen. Every soup on Earth, from Homelander down, is a delivery system for compound V. Pull the V out of the equation, and you have a person we can understand, market, contain, and if necessary, kill. This thing has no V to pull. It's not on our map. It doesn't run on our fuel. Then what does it run on? Ashley whispered. Sage looked at the frozen visor for a long moment. Best available read, she said. Rage. It runs on rage, and it never runs out. Grant tried again, because it was that, or admit the playbook didn't apply, and the playbook was the only religion these people had. Okay. So we branded. We got out ahead of the Soldier Boy thing. We got out ahead of Stormfront. Badly, but we did. We can spin anything. We say it's a new hero. Experimental Vought asset. We name it, we put it in a suit. A branded suit. Over that awful. We build a merch line. We control the narrative before it controls us. He was warming up now, the liability brain finding its groove. What's the market, Red Sage? Give me a demo. Is it a 4-quadrant hero or is it a edgy teen boy hero? Because if it's edgy teen boy, we're looking at a whole different... Grant, Sage said. Look at it. Everyone looked at it. It walked out of a hole in reality, Sage said, onto a floor full of men whose entire job was to kill things, and it dismantled them in 9 seconds without changing its pace. It ignored Sister Sage, me, the person it would be smartest to eliminate, and let a monitoring tech live for reasons we can't model. It tore the aperture apart to study it, and then it started climbing. She set down the tablet. It is not looking for a contract. It is not looking for fame. It is not looking for revenge on some individual we can hand over. Every behavioral marker says the same thing, and it's a thing Vought has never once in its history had to price in. She looked around the table. It's not here to be a hero or a villain. It's here to end something, and it hasn't decided what yet. It's climbing toward Homelander, Ashley said. It wasn't a question. It's climbing toward the top, Sage corrected. Homelander's just what's at the top. The word landed in the room like a stone in a still pond, and the ripples were visible on every face. Because for all their fear of the thing in the footage, there was a second fear underneath it, older and more familiar, and it had blonde hair and a cape and a smile it practiced in the mirror. Homelander was, at this moment, 3 floors above them, and Homelander did not yet know. Homelander had been told there was an incident, which was the word Vought used when the truth was still being manufactured, and Homelander had gone very quiet on the phone, in a way that everyone in the building had learned to be terrified of, because a quiet Homelander was a Homelander deciding who to be angry at. He'll want to see it, Ashley said. He'll want to, God. He'll want to fight it, on camera. He'll turn it into a moment. He always turns it into a moment. Yes, Sage said, and for the first time something flickered across her composure. Not fear, exactly, but the specific weariness of a genius, forced to watch idiots handle a live grenade. That's the actual problem, not the thing in the basement. The thing in the basement is a known quantity now, extremely dangerous, unbranded, unbought, but predictable, in that it wants to end something, and will go where the something is. She stood. The unpredictable variable is that we have, on the 72nd floor, the single most powerful and least stable soup on Earth, and he is about to find out that a walking massacre came out of our basement and is climbing toward his floor. And Homelander does not respond well to the existence of things stronger than him. Homelander has, historically, responded to that specific stimulus by killing everyone in the room and improvising a press release. Ashley pulled another hair. She had, at this point, a small collection of them on the $11,000 chair, and she was going to have a bald patch you could see from the mezzanine by lunch, and she did not care, because the ambient dread in her chest had crystallized into a single perfect understanding. There was a thing in the basement that Vought could not brand, could not buy, could not contain, and could not kill. There was a god on the 72nd floor who would insist on trying. And Vought, the great machine, the reality factory, the corporation that had spent 80 years teaching a nation to worship the monsters it manufactured, was going to be standing directly between them when they met. "Get me comms," Ashley said hoarsely. "Get me Homelander's handler. Get me, God, get me a lid on this before it—" The lights in the boardroom flickered. Not a brownout this time, just a flicker, a single stutter of the serene Copenhagen lighting, the kind of thing that in any other building means nothing. Every person at the marble table went absolutely still, because in this building, in this particular hour, a flicker in the lights meant that something was drawing enormous power somewhere below them, and there was only one thing in the tower that did that. It was still climbing. Far above the boardroom, on the 72nd floor, in a penthouse decorated with the taste of a man who had been told his whole life that he had none, Homelander stood at the window with his back to the room and watched the sun come up over a city that loved him, and he was smiling, and no one was there to see the smile, which meant it was the real one, which meant it was the one that would have emptied a stadium if the stadium had known. He had been told there was an incident. He had been told to wait. Homelander did not like to wait, and he was, at this precise moment, deciding that he wasn't going to. The boys had a rule, one of the few Butcher actually kept, and the rule was, you never move on a Vought site without knowing what you're walking into. It was the rule that had kept them alive through Stormfront and Soldier Boy, and the long, ugly years since. And it was. Reflected as he watched Butcher load a duffel bag with things they absolutely were not licensed to own. Exactly the rule Butcher was about to break. "We don't know what it is," said. "We know it killed 6 of Vought's best in 9 seconds and left the tower shitting itself," Butcher said. "That's enough of a CV for me." "That's exactly the problem." Planted himself in the doorway, which was a thing he did when he needed Butcher to actually hear him, because Butcher had a talent for looking at a person and not seeing them. 6 of Vought's best. Butcher, those weren't security guards. Those were operators. And it went through them like they weren't there. You want to walk up to that and, what, shake its hand, recruit it? You don't recruit a wildfire, man. You get out of its way. Frenchie, who had been sprawled on the couch apparently asleep, spoke without opening his eyes. "Or," he said, "you learn which way the wind blows and you make sure the thing you hate is upwind." Kimiko, beside him, signed something quick and sharp. Frenchie translated without needing to look. She says, "If it kills Soups, it is not our friend. It is a storm that happens to be pointed the right way." She says storms do not stay pointed. "She's right," said. "Course she's right," Butcher said, zipping the duffel. "She's always bloody right. That's what makes her the smart one. Don't change the maths." He straightened and looked around the room at all of them. At exhaustion, at Frenchie's wary calm, at Kimiko's flat, unreadable stare, at Huey hovering by the wall trying to look like he had an opinion. "Let me lay it out for the cheap seats. For years, we've been hunting one thing, not evidence, not leverage. Those are nice, those keep the lights on. But the actual grail, the thing that'd end it, we've never had. A weapon that kills Homelander. We had it for about a week with Soldier Boy, and Soldier Boy turned out to be a walking nuke who'd have flattened a city block to win a pissing contest. So that's the bar, yeah? That's what we're working with. The only Homelander killer we ever found was a monster in his own right." He picked up the phone with MM's photo still on it, held it up. "And now Vought, the people who built Homelander, who know exactly what it takes to put him down, 'cause God knows they've wargamed it 1,000 times. Vought looked at whatever came out of that hole and rated it above him, above their own God, in their own paperwork, where they've got no reason to lie, 'cause it's not for public consumption." His voice had gone quiet and terrible. "You know what that is? That's Vought telling me, by accident, in a leaked requisition form, that the thing I've been looking for my whole life is standing in their tower right now." "And you don't know what it wants," said. "Don't need to know what it wants. Need to know what it does." Butcher's grin came back. "And what it does is kill Soups. So we go find it. We get in front of it before Vought does something clever, and we point it at the only Soup that matters." He shouldered the duffel. "You lot can come or you can stay, but I'm not sitting in this shithole while the answer to everything walks around loose." There was a silence. "Butcher," Huey said, And everyone looked at him, because Huey usually knew better than to start a sentence when Butcher was mid-momentum. Huey was the youngest of them, the one who'd been dragged into all this by a dead girlfriend and a soup who'd walked away whistling, and somewhere in the years since he'd become the closest thing this crew had to a conscience, which mostly meant he was the one who said the uncomfortable thing while everyone else pretended not to hear it. He looked pale and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, which was his default, but he said it anyway. What if it doesn't stop at Homelander? Butcher paused at the door. You keep saying it kills soups, Huey said. Okay, say you're right. Say it's exactly what you want it to be. It goes up that tower and it does Homelander. Great, fine, God, finally. Then what? It killed 6 people in a basement, Butcher. Were all 6 of them soups? Were any of them? He swallowed. You keep saying weapon, like a weapon's a thing you aim. But you didn't build this one. You didn't load it. You don't know what it's actually pointed at. And the second it's done with Homelander, maybe it's pointed at everybody with a needle mark. And maybe that's Kimiko. And maybe after that it just keeps going. Because whatever came out of that hole didn't come here for you. It doesn't know you exist. And you're about to walk up and introduce yourself. The room had gone very still. Kimiko was watching Huey, and something in her flat stare had softened, because Huey had said her name in a list of people a killing machine might not stop for, and she was the only one in the room who'd been a weapon someone else had loaded, and she knew exactly how that ended. Butcher looked at Huey for a long moment, and the awful thing, the thing saw and Huey saw and everyone saw, was that Butcher had already thought of all of it. That was what made Butcher Butcher. He wasn't reckless because he hadn't considered the cost. He was reckless because he'd considered it and decided he didn't care. Then it kills a lot of soups on its way to whatever it's really after, Butcher said, and I'll shed a tear for none of them. Get your coat, Huey. Or don't. But the thing about Grails, son, you don't get to pick 'em pretty. He walked out. After a moment, one by one, they followed, because they always followed. And that was the whole tragedy of them. They found it faster than they should have, which should have been the first warning. It wasn't in the tower anymore. That was the thing that made MM's blood run cold when the tracking came through. A fresh power anomaly, a comms blackout, a scatter of frantic Vought security chatter he'd pulled off a channel he wasn't supposed to have, because it meant the thing had done something in the tower, and then left, on its own terms, walking out of the most heavily defended building in North America like a man leaving a diner. It had come down. It was on the ground. It was in the city, among the people, in the daylight. And Vought's entire apparatus was scrambling to figure out where it was going and, more urgently, how to keep several million New Yorkers from filming it. The boys found it in a parking structure on the Lower East Side, 4 levels down, because that was where the power draw had gone dark, and where 3 Vought containment vans had converged and, crucially, where 3 Vought containment vans had stopped transmitting. They came down the ramp low and careful, weapons up, and MM's stomach turned over at what the parking level had become. The vans were open. The teams that had come out of them were not a threat anymore, in the specific and total way that meant did not look too closely, because he had a wall of red string at home and a family he wanted to see again. And there was only so much a man could carry. The concrete was slick. The fluorescent lights buzzed and stuttered. And in the center of it, standing over the wreckage of Vought's second attempt to contain it in 12 hours, was the thing itself. It was bigger than the footage. That was always true, and it was never not a shock. Armor the color of dried blood and battlefield green, scarred and scorched. That skull and chevron mark on the chest catching the dead fluorescent light. It had a weapon in its hands now, not a gun anyone made, a thing of barrels and menace that it must have carried through the door or built from the parts of this world it had torn apart. And it was, as they came around the last pillar, in the act of turning toward them. Everything stopped. MM's rifle was up. Frenchie's was up. Kimiko had gone into a crouch, her whole body a coiled question. Huey had frozen with his mouth slightly open, and Butcher lowered his weapon. He lowered his weapon, and he stepped out from behind the pillar, into the open, into the sightline of a thing that had killed 9 trained professionals across 2 encounters in a combined 17 seconds. And he spread his hands, and wanted to scream at him and couldn't make a sound. Easy, big fella, Butcher said. in the voice he used on frightened animals and frightened men, which were the only two things Butcher had ever fully understood. "We ain't Vought. We hate the bastards same as you clearly do." He nodded at the wreckage, at the open vans, at the specific and total silence of the teams inside them. "Nice work, by the way. Very thorough." The visor regarded him. It gave nothing back. No word, no sound, no shift in posture that a man could read. It simply looked at Billy Butcher the way it had looked at everything else in this world, as a variable, as a thing to be sorted into one of two categories. And understood, with a clarity that put ice in his gut, that they were all currently being assessed, and that they did not yet know the criteria. "There's a fella," Butcher went on, taking one slow step closer. "Top of that tower you just came out of. Homelander. Biggest, worst, meanest soup there is. Kills whoever he likes, and the whole world claps. Another step. You strike me as the sort who's got opinions about that kind of thing." The thing did not answer, but, and would swear to this later, and none of them would quite believe him. The great weapon in its hands lowered, fractionally, a degree or two, the barrels dropping toward the concrete. It was listening. God help them all. Butcher had gotten it to listen. Homelander found out the way he found out everything he wasn't supposed to know, by listening through the walls. He was very good at it. He could stand in his penthouse on the 72nd floor and, if he tuned everything else out, the traffic, the elevators, the 10,000 heartbeats stacked below him like coins in a jar, he could pick a single conversation out of the tower, the way you'd pick a face out of a crowd. He'd been doing it since he was a boy in the lab, listening to the men in the observation room describe him in numbers, and he'd never once told anyone he could do it, because the not telling was the only privacy a man like him would ever have. So he'd heard the boardroom. All of it, Ashley pulling her hair, Grant babbling about merch, and Sage, who he was supposed to trust, who he'd chosen, saying it out loud in her flat, clever voice to a room full of people who weren't him. It came through the door already finished. "It's not on our map. Best available read? Rage. It runs on rage and it never runs out." And then the part that had made something go very cold and very still at the center of Homelander. "We have, on the 72nd floor, the single most powerful and least stable soup on Earth." The single most powerful. They'd rated the thing above him. He'd heard Sage say it, heard the specific, unbearable phrasing. For context, the fastest kill spread we have on Homelander. Heard them measure the basement thing against him, and find him slower. And the whole rotten edifice of Homelander, the god-emperor of the manufactured sky, the being who had spent his entire life terrified that somewhere out there was a bigger boy who'd take his toys. The whole thing had lit up like a struck match. He didn't wait. Of course he didn't wait. He'd been told to wait, and being told to wait by the people he owned was, at this moment, its own small, unbearable insult. He went out the window of his own tower, glass and steel folding away from him like it was embarrassed to have tried, and he found the thing the way Vaught's whole apparatus couldn't. Because Vought looked at data, and Homelander looked at the ground and simply saw the parking structure with 3 ruined vans, and the little cluster of insects standing near something his instincts screamed at him about from 400 feet up. He came down through the top 3 levels of the parking structure. He did not use the ramp. The concrete ceiling of level 4 exploded inward, and Billy Butcher's careful, dangerous, hard-won moment of listening evaporated in a rain of rebar and dust, because a laughing golden light dropped through the hole it had punched and landed in the center of the parking level with the casual violence of a god who had never once in his life had to open a door. "Well," said Homelander, straightening, brushing concrete dust off a cape that cost more than most people's cars. "Isn't this cozy?" The boys scattered on instinct, years of instinct, the specific full-body knowledge of what it meant to be in an enclosed space with Homelander, which was that you were already dead and merely awaiting his convenience. Had Kimiko behind a pillar. Frenchie had a hand on Huey's collar, dragging. Butcher had not moved, because Butcher's entire strategy for surviving Homelander had always been to refuse to give him the fear he fed on, and he stood his ground with his hands loose and his face a mask of contempt. Homelander didn't even look at them. That was the horror of it. Butcher, his oldest enemy, the man whose wife Homelander looked right past him, past all of them, to the armored thing standing in the wreckage of the vans, and his face did something complicated. A smile that was trying very hard to be amused and was, underneath, the face of a frightened child who had just been told there was a bigger boy. "So you're the basement special," Homelander said, walking toward it. Slow, a runway walk, a look-at-me walk. "The thing that's got my whole company wetting itself. I have to say, I expected, I don't know, more? You're a bit cosplay, aren't you? Little bit Comic-Con." He laughed, and the laugh was for an audience that wasn't there. "They rated you above me. Did you know that? My own people. Above me." His voice stayed light, and the smile stayed fixed, and his eyes had started, very faintly, to glow, which I find, honestly, a little insulting. To them, because they've clearly never, actually, seen me work. The armored figure turned to face him fully. And it did the thing that no one, in the entire recorded history of the world, had ever done to Homelander. Nothing. It didn't flinch, it didn't posture. It didn't raise its weapon or lower it or speak or startle or bargain or beg. It regarded Homelander, the smile, the glowing eyes, the cape, the whole practiced performance of the most dangerous man alive, with the exact, identical, unhurried attention it had given the badge reader, and the aperture, and the 6 dead operators. Homelander was, to the thing in the armor, a variable, a thing to be sorted. And the sorting was, visibly, already underway, and it was not going the way Homelander was used to sortings going. Watching from behind the pillar, understood in that instant that he was seeing something genuinely new. Everyone flinched at Homelander. Everyone. Sage flinched and hid it. Butcher flinched and buried it under hate. The bravest men had ever known flinched at Homelander, because their bodies were smarter than their pride. It was the tribute the world paid, the constant background radiation of the man's power, the little tell, the swallow, the held breath, the flicker of the eyes toward the exit. Homelander fed on it. He needed it the way other men needed air. It was how he knew he was real. And the thing in the armor gave him nothing. Homelander's smile stayed up, but something behind it had begun, very slightly, to come apart. "Nothing to say?" Homelander said, and his voice had gone a notch higher. The register he didn't know he had, the one that came out when the frightened boy pressed too close to the surface. "That's fine. You know what, that's actually great. I love a strong silent type. Very macho, very..." He was in front of it now, close enough to touch, close enough that his glowing eyes were inches from the visor, and he leaned in, and he dropped his voice to the intimate murmur he used right before he killed someone, the last thing a lot of people ever heard. "Let me tell you how this goes, Tin Man. This is my city. Those are my people up there loving me. And you are a glitch, a basement mistake. And in about 4 seconds I'm going to open you up like a tin of beans and put whatever's inside you on the evening news. And Vought's going to spin it. And by Friday, there'll be a toy." The eyes flared white-hot. "So say cheese." He fired his heat vision point-blank into the visor. The parking level went white. Threw an arm over his eyes. Frenchie cursed. The heat wash rolled off the twin beams and blistered the paint on the ruined vans 40 feet away, and cracked the concrete and turned the stale air to a furnace. And Homelander poured it on, poured everything into that visor at a range where he had, personally, reduced grown men to grease shadows on a wall, and he was smiling, because this was the part he liked. This was the part where the world remembered what he was. The beams cut off. The smoke cleared. The thing in the armor was still standing. It had not moved. It had not been driven back a single inch. The visor, the part Homelander had aimed for, the part that should have been the first thing to go, was scorched black and intact. And behind it, those 2 suggestions of eyes were still there, still regarding him, still sorting. And realized with a lurch that the sorting had just finished. The thing had its answer now. It knew what Homelander was. And for the first time since it walked out of the hole in the world, it moved with something other than patience. Its free hand came up, not fast. That was the terrible thing. Not a blur, just a deliberate and unhurried motion. The motion of a man who has all the time in the world because he has decided the outcome. And it closed that gauntleted fist around the front of Homelander's suit, around the collar of the most powerful being on the planet, and it lifted him off the ground, one-handed, the way a man lifts a kitten by the scruff, And Homelander. Homelander who flew, who could crack the earth, who had never in his adult life been held, hung there, feet kicking a full foot off the concrete, and for one perfect, unrepeatable, world-ending instant, the smile fell off his face entirely. And underneath it, plain for everyone to see, was the frightened boy. Homelander's eyes went wide again, on pure reflex, on animal panic, and he blasted point blank into the armored chest, and he hammered a fist into the side of that helmet with enough force to level a building, and the thing took both, took the heat and took the punch, its head snapping fractionally to the side and coming right back. And then it drew its arm back, with Homelander still dangling from its fist, and it threw the god of the manufactured sky through 4 reinforced concrete pillars and out the far wall of the parking structure into the daylight, and the whole building groaned and sagged and dropped a foot on its ruined supports, and dust rained down, and somewhere very far away, a car alarm began to wail. In the settling grit, the boys stood frozen. Butcher had not moved. His mouth was slightly open, and on his face was an expression had never seen there before, not in all their years, not once. An expression that was equal parts triumph and pure, animal terror, the face of a man who had prayed for a thing his whole life, and was only now, in the moment of its answer, beginning to understand what he'd actually asked for. Through the hole in the far wall, in the daylight, they could hear Homelander getting up. They could hear him screaming, not in pain. Homelander didn't feel pain like that, but in something worse, something had never heard from him and hoped to God he'd never hear again. The sound of the frightened boy realizing there was a bigger boy after all. And the thing in the armor turned, unhurried, toward the hole its enemy had but. Sister Sage had a rule about panic, which was that panic was just information you hadn't finished processing yet. She had watched the parking structure footage 4 times before Ashley finished her first scream, and by the 5th viewing, she had stopped watching the armored thing and started watching Homelander, because the armored thing was a constant now. She understood it, or understood enough of it to price it, and Homelander was the variable that was going to get them all killed. She'd seen his face when it lifted him, frozen the frame, studied it the way a geologist studies a fault line, because that expression, that was new, and new things were the only things that mattered. He's going to escalate, she said. She was already walking, tablet under her arm, and Ashley was scrambling to keep up, pulling hair, and behind them Grant from legal was on 3 phones at once trying to get ahead of the 11 million pieces of citizen footage that were, at this exact moment, hitting the internet. He got embarrassed, on the ground, close range, in front of Butcher of all people. Homelander doesn't process embarrassment as embarrassment. He processes it as a threat to his existence, and he responds to threats to his existence by generating a bigger threat to everyone else's. Standard displacement. He'll go back at it. He'll go back at it harder, and he'll go back at it soon, because the one thing he can't tolerate is time to think about how it felt to be held. So we let them fight, Ashley said, a little wildly. Right? We let them fight. One of them wins. We spin the survivor. That's a story we can tell. Sage stopped walking, looked at her CEO with something close to pity. Ashley, she said, there's no version where Homelander wins this. I need you to hear that as a strategic input, not an emotional one. I ran it 140 ways. He is not stronger than it. He is not tougher than it. He is not faster than it, and, this is the part that ends us, he is not smarter than it, because it doesn't want anything he can threaten. You can't threaten a thing that came here to die killing. You can't buy it, scare it, or outweight it. Homelander's entire arsenal is built on the assumption that his opponent is afraid of dying. It isn't. She started walking again. So no, we don't let them fight. We end the fight, on our terms, before Homelander turns Manhattan into a crater trying to win a contest he already lost. End it how? You just said we can't kill it. We can't kill it with what we have. Those are different sentences. Sage swiped her tablet, and a schematic bloomed on the screen, dense with Vought's ugliest secrets. Aperture was a door. Doors go 2 ways. If it came through, it can be put through. And a thing that runs on rage and never runs out is still, at the end of the day, a thing that occupies space. We don't have to break it. We have to move it. Off the board. back through the hole, or into a hole of our own. She was talking fast now, the genius uncoiling. And while my people rebuild the aperture, we throw everything we've got at slowing it down. Not stopping. Slowing. Every asset. The whole roster. And the arsenal. Ashley stopped dead. The arsenal doesn't work on it. You said. No V. So the virus doesn't. The virus doesn't. BCL Red doesn't. The nullifier doesn't. All correct, and all irrelevant. Because I'm not trying to depower it. I'm trying to inconvenience it long enough to open a door under its feet. Sage's smile was thin and joyless. You want to know the difference between me and everybody else in this building, Ashley? Everybody else spent the morning asking whether our weapons could kill it. I spent the morning accepting that they can't, and asking what they can do anyway. A thing that can't be hurt can still be delayed. Distracted. Hurted. She reached the elevator and pressed the call button. So we're going to hurt it. We're going to throw the 7 at it, not to win, they can't win, but to occupy it. And we're going to throw the whole black site catalog at it for the same reason. And we're going to use every second they buy me to open a door under it and drop it out of this reality entirely. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. And we are going to do all of this while managing Homelander, who is going to insist on being in the middle of it, and who is the single most likely reason the whole plan fails. And if it does fail, Ashley whispered, following her in. Sage looked at the doors as they closed on the two of them, the smartest person alive and the most frightened, sealed together in a mirrored steel box, descending. Then Vought made a door to hell, Sage said, and something walked through it that we can't send back, and it's in our house, and it's angry, and there's nothing on earth that can stop it. The elevator hummed. So let's try very hard for the other thing. They threw the 7 at it on a rooftop in Midtown, because that was where the thing had run Homelander to ground, and where Homelander, screaming, humiliated, past reason, had turned to make his stand, and where Vought's crisis apparatus had realized to its horror that it now had a live God versus monster fight happening in the open air above a city of 8 million people, with news helicopters already inbound. Sage's play was elegant, and it was doomed, and she knew both things at once. She sent A-Train in first, because A-Train was fast enough to survive being wrong. She sent the Deep, because the Deep was expendable, and knew it, and would do anything to not know it. She held the newer, harder members in reserve, and she sent, above all of it, a directive that Homelander ignored the instant he received it, because the directive was disengage and let us handle the extraction, and Homelander had never disengaged from anything in his life. A-Train hit the armored thing at just under the speed of sound, a blur of V-fueled muscle, carrying enough kinetic energy to derail a train, and it was, would later admit, a genuinely good hit. It staggered the thing, moved it half a step. The thing caught A-Train on the return pass. It didn't chase. You couldn't chase A-Train. That was the whole point of A-Train. It simply understood, in the cold sorting way it understood everything, that A-Train had to come back around, and where, and it put out one arm at the exact geometry of the return, and the fastest man alive ran full speed into a bar of otherworldly metal that did not move, and the sound it made was not a sound would describe, and A-Train was abruptly no longer the fastest man alive, or any kind of man at all, and the Deep took one look at what remained, and did the smartest thing the Deep had ever done, which was to turn around and leap off the building, and swim away through the sewers, and never, ever come back. And Homelander, watching 2 of his own die in under 4 seconds, did the thing Sage had known he would do, the thing she'd built her entire timeline around preventing, and had failed to prevent, because you cannot prevent Homelander from being Homelander. He stopped trying to win the fight in front of the cameras, and he made it about the city instead. He rose up off the rooftop, up into the clear morning sky where the news helicopters wheeled, and his eyes were white and his face was wet, and his voice, when it came, was amplified by lungs that could shatter glass at a mile, so that all of Midtown heard the god of the manufactured sky deliver, in the reasonable tone of a man who has decided to end the world to win an argument, the words that turned Sage's containment operation into a massacre in progress. You want to fight? Homelander screamed at the small armored figure on the rooftop, which stood in the wreckage of 2 dead soups, and looked up at him without fear. Fine, fine. Let's see how much you like it. Let's see how unstoppable you are. And he turned in the air, away from the thing that had held him by the collar, away from the enemy he could not beat. And he looked down at the crowded streets and the crowded windows and the 8 million people who had, until this exact morning, loved him. When I do this. The first person Homelander killed to prove a point was a woman named Denise Okafor, 41, a paralegal, who was standing at the window of a 30th floor conference room because she'd heard the helicopters and wanted to see what was happening. And what was happening came through the glass, and through her, and through the 3 people behind her, before any of them understood that the God they'd voted for, tweeted about, defended at Thanksgiving, had just decided their lives were worth less than his pride. The beam swept. That was the thing about heat vision at Homelander's output. It didn't hit, it swept. A scything line of white fire that opened the side of the building like a can and everything behind the glass. And Homelander drew it slow, savoring, the way a child drags a stick along a fence. And the screaming started, and it did not stop for a long time. On the rooftop, the Slayer moved. Was watching through a spotting scope from an adjacent building. Butcher had refused to leave, of course he had. And the whole crew was strung across a parking garage roof 2 blocks off, close enough to see, far enough to survive, which was the exact distance Butcher liked to live his life at. And watched the armored thing's posture change, and something in his chest went cold, because he'd read that change before. He'd read it on the parking structure footage. It was the change from sorting to decided. The thing had come to this world to end something. It had spent a day trying to determine what. And Homelander, in the act of raking a building full of civilians to win a contest of nerve, had just answered the question in letters a mile high. That. It ends that. He's making it worse, Huey breathed beside him. God, every second he does that, it's telling that thing exactly what it hates. He's loading the gun and pointing it at himself. Good, Butcher said. Huey turned on him. Good? Butcher, there are people in that building. There are always people in the building, Huey, Butcher said, and he didn't take his eyes off the scope, and his voice was flat and old and terrible. There's always people in the building. That's the whole bloody game. He does this because he knows we won't let people die to win, and he will. And that asymmetry is how he's beaten us for years. So yeah, good. Because for once there's something out there that don't play by that rule either. Something that'll walk through the people to get to him. Or won't. I don't know which yet. But either way it's not gonna flinch. And flinching's the only weapon Homelander's ever had. And that was the dilemma, wasn't it? Felt it land in his gut like a swallowed stone. That was the exact ugly heart of the thing Huey had been trying to say back at the hideout. The thing Butcher had already decided not to care about. Because the Slayer was moving now. It had launched itself off the rooftop toward Homelander. A leap that shouldn't have been possible. Armor and all, closing 30 feet of open air. And Homelander had broken off from the building to meet it. And the 2 of them collided in the sky over Midtown with a sound like a bomb. And they were fighting now. Really fighting. God and monster tumbling through the air, trading blows that cracked windows for blocks in every direction. And the building was still burning. And the people in it were still dying. And the Slayer had gone up after Homelander instead of down after the wounded. Because the Slayer's answer to what do I end was the source. Was the man doing this. And it would go through anything to reach him. Including, understood with sick clarity, the people the man was hurting. It's not saving them, said. You see that, right, Butcher? It's not going for the people. It's going for him. It doesn't care about the building. It never cared about the building. It cares about killing the thing that made the building burn. He lowered the scope. That's not a hero. That's just a bigger fire pointed at the first one. I never said it was a hero. Butcher finally lowered his own scope and looked at and there was something almost gentle in it, which was worse than anything. You lot keep wanting it to be a hero. Hughie wants it to save the building. You want it to be somebody we can live with. It ain't. It's a weapon. Weapons don't save buildings. They kill what you point 'em at. And if there's people in the way, that's on the fella who put 'em there. And that fella's him, flying about with his eyes lit up. He nodded at the sky. The only question I care about is, does it finish him? Everything else is just the cost. And who decides the cost is worth it? Huey said quietly. You get to decide. Because right now the thing that's supposedly on our side is ignoring a building full of people to win a fistfight. And the only reason you're okay with that is because the fistfight's one you wanted to win. Butcher didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. Because Huey was right, and being right had never once stopped anything. And then Kimiko touched MM's arm. She'd gone still, stiller than the rest of them, and she was watching the fight in the sky with an expression MM had learned to read over the years. The flat, unreadable mask cracking around the eyes, and she signed something, fast, and MM had to ask her to repeat it, and Frenchie translated, and his voice was strange when he did. She says, look at how it fights. Frenchie's brow furrowed. She says, it does not fight like a man. It does not fight like Homelander, who fights to be seen winning. It does not even fight like us, to survive. She says, he paused, watching her hands. She says it fights like she used to fight, before, when they made her a weapon and pointed her and took the person out. She says there is no one inside the fighting. It is all function, purpose. No fear, no hate, no joy. Just the ending of a thing, over and over, forever. Frenchie's jaw tightened. She says, this is not a person who kills. This is killing that learned to walk. And she says, Kimiko says, she is afraid of it. Not because it will hurt her, because she remembers being it. The rooftop went quiet. In the sky, the Slayer had gotten a grip on Homelander again, that impossible, unhurried, total grip, and it was driving him down out of the sky, down toward the streets, and Homelander was fighting it every foot of the way, blasting, screaming, hammering, and it was not enough. It was never going to be enough, and MM realized he was watching the most powerful being he'd ever known lose. Comprehensively, publicly, on live television, to a thing that did not even hate him. That was the part Kimiko had seen. The Slayer did not hate Homelander. Hate would have been a mercy. Hate would have been personal, and there was nothing personal here. There was only a machine that ended cruelty walking toward the largest cruelty in the room, and the largest cruelty happened to be wearing a cape. We should be down there, Huey said, in the building, getting people out, while they're distracted. We could actually help, Butcher, right now, instead of standing here watching. And that, MM thought, was the difference between them and Butcher, and the difference between them and the thing in the sky. Hughie wanted to run toward the burning building. The Slayer wanted to run toward the fire's source. Butcher wanted to run toward whatever killed the most soups. 3 answers to the same question, and only one of them had people in it. Go then, Butcher said, surprising all of them. Take Frenchie, take the girl. Get who you can out the bottom. I'll stay on the fight. And when Huey looked at him, startled, Butcher shrugged, and for one moment the mask slipped, and something almost human showed through the hate. What? I wanted to kill Homelander. Don't mean I want a paralegal to die for it. I ain't him, son. Not all the way. Not yet. A beat. Now go, before I change my mind and remember I don't care. They went, and MM stayed with Butcher, watching the god fall out of the sky in the grip of the thing that had come to end him, and he thought about Kimiko's hands moving in the cold morning air, killing that learnin' to walk, and he thought that whatever won this fight, the city was going to lose, and that maybe that had always been the only honest ending to a story about people who worshipped monsters. The Slayer drove Homelander into the street below with a force that cracked the pavement in a spiderweb 50 feet across, and stood over him in the crater, and raised its fist, and MM held his breath. And Homelander, from the bottom of the crater, spat blood and laughed, high and broken, and utterly without sanity, and said something MM couldn't hear, and whatever it was, it made the Slayer pause. 1 second, half a second. And in that half second, a black Vought aircraft screamed in over the rooftops, and something fell from it, and the world went white. The thing that fell from the Vought aircraft was not a bomb exactly, though the news would call it one for the 3 hours before Vaught's comms team replaced the word with experimental containment measure, which polled better. Sage had built it in an afternoon out of the ugliest thing in the black site catalog, a directed concussive pulse, the kind of over-under-the-table weapon Vought kept for putting down its own assets when an asset went bad, scaled up past every safety margin, and dropped from height at the one moment the Slayer was standing still. It was not meant to kill the Slayer. Sage had been honest with herself about that. Nothing in the catalog would kill the Slayer. It was meant to move it. to hit it with enough raw force to knock it off Homelander and out of the crater, and buy the 90 seconds her people needed. Because 90 seconds was how long the rebuilt aperture needed to spin up, and the rebuilt aperture was 2 blocks away in a Vought staging truck, humming, waiting for a target to be herded onto the plate. The pulse hit like the hand of God. Felt it from 2 blocks away. The shock wave rolled across the parking garage roof and knocked him flat and set every car alarm in a half-mile radius wailing at once. When he got up, ears ringing, the intersection where the Slayer had stood over Homelander was a smoking bowl of shattered glass and buckled asphalt, and at the center of it the Slayer was down on one knee. Down, on one knee. Had not seen the thing so much as stumble in a full day of watching it kill. And here it was, one knee in the wreckage, the armor scorched and cracked along one side, that skull and chevron mark on its chest, half obscured by soot. It was not hurt the way a man is hurt, but it had been moved, and that, Sage had understood something the rest of them hadn't. That was the only victory available, and she had taken it. Because the pulse had done its real job. It had knocked the Slayer off Homelander, and it had knocked it 2 feet closer to the aperture truck, and Sage's whole plan had never been to win a fight. It had been to nudge an immovable object, over and over, in one direction, until it stood on the plate. Homelander was already gone. He'd rolled out of the crater the instant the pulse hit, and caught a flash of red, white, and blue streaking up into the sky, away, fleeing, and something in M's chest curdled at the sight, because that was the thing about Homelander that the crowds never saw. When it came down to it, when there was finally something in the world that could actually hurt him, the god of the manufactured sky ran. He'd murdered a building full of civilians to prove he wasn't afraid, and the second there was a moment to escape, he took it and left the city he'd set on fire behind him. But the cameras were still rolling. That was the part Sage couldn't fix. That was the part no one could fix. Because the news helicopters had gotten all of it, every second, and it was live. And it had been live the whole time, streaming to every phone and screen in a nation that had spent 80 years being taught that Homelander was invincible, that Homelander was a god, that Homelander was the shining apex of everything a soup could be. And the nation had just watched, in real time, in daylight, from a dozen angles, an armored thing pick that god up by the collar like laundry, and throw him through a building and drive him into the street and stand over him to finish him. They had watched their god lose, and then they had watched him run. In the Vought boardroom, no one was speaking. The wall of screens showed the same footage on a loop from 40 angles. Homelander fleeing, the crater, the kneeling armored figure, cut against the live social feeds, which were doing the thing Sage had spent her entire career trying to prevent a public from doing, which was thinking for itself. The hashtags were already forming. Ashley watched them scroll and felt the last of her hair-pulling composure dissolve into pure animal despair, because she'd spent her whole career learning to read the exact temperature of the public's love for Homelander, and she was watching, live, that love curdle into something she'd been trained since her first day at Vought to treat as the only real apocalypse: doubt. He ran, said the internet. He killed those people and then he ran. That thing beat him like he was nothing. He's not a god. He's just a bully who finally met someone bigger. Who is that? Whoever that is in the armor. That's the real. Kill the feeds, Ashley whispered. Kill the social feeds. Kill the... Grant. Get the takedown machine spun up. We say it's deep fakes. We say the whole thing's a foreign... Ashley. Sage's voice, flat and quiet, from the doorway. She'd come up from the staging truck, and she looked, for the first time M's contact inside the tower had ever reported, genuinely tired. You can't put this one back. 11 million people filmed it from their own windows. This isn't a narrative we lost control of. It's a reality we lost control of. There's a difference, and it's the difference that ends companies. Then what do we? We do the only thing left. Sage crossed to the window and looked down at the smoking city. We stopped trying to save Homelander's image, because Homelander's image died at 9:14 this morning on live television, and it is not coming back. We accept that. And we pivot everything, all of it, to getting that thing off the board before it decides that Homelander was just the first item on the list. She turned. Because here's what I need everyone in this room to understand. It knelt. For the first time, it knelt. Which means my play works. The pulse works. If I can stack enough of them and herd it onto the plate, I can send it back through the door. But, she held up one finger, it's going to get up. And when it gets up, it's going to have learned something about us, that we hit it from behind, from the air, while it was distracted, killing the thing we told the whole world was our hero. It's going to understand now that Vought, not Homelander, Vought, is the machine that made the cruelty. And when a thing that ends cruelty understands that, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Because at that exact moment, 2 blocks away, in the smoking crater at the intersection, the armored thing planted one gauntleted fist against the buckled asphalt, and pushed, and rose from its knee, and stood. And it did not look up at the sky where Homelander had fled. It turned, slowly, that scorched visor sweeping across the skyline until it found the one building that mattered. The glass and chrome tower with the Vought logo on it, the reality factory, the place the aircraft had come from, and the pulse had come from, and the 6 dead men in the basement had come from, and every single cruelty in this whole rotten city ultimately came from. And it fixed on it, and it stood very still. And watching through his cracked spotting scope from 2 blocks away, felt his blood go to ice, because he understood what Kimiko had understood, and what Sage had just understood, and what Butcher, grinning, terrible, delighted Butcher, had wanted from the very beginning, without ever quite grasping the shape of it. The Slayer had come to this world to end something. It had spent a day sorting through the candidates. Homelander had been the loudest, the biggest, the most obvious, the god at the top of the tower. But Homelander had run, and in running had revealed himself to be exactly what he was, a symptom, a product, a thing that had been made, and the thing in the armor had finally understood what made him. It took its first step toward the tower, deliberate, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world, because it had decided the outcome. Butcher, said, and his voice came out wrong. It's not going after Homelander anymore. Butcher lowered his scope, and the grin on his face had frozen into something that wasn't quite a grin, and for the first time all day he looked, thought, like a man who'd caught the thing he'd been chasing, and only now felt its weight in his hands. No, Butcher said softly, watching the armored figure begin its long, patient walk toward the heart of Vought. No, it ain't. It's going after the whole bloody company. A pause. Every soul in that building. There were, on any given weekday, roughly 4,000 people inside Vought Tower. Did the math without meaning to, the way he always did, the way the wall of red string had trained him to. Executives, yes. Handlers, PR flacks, the boardroom ghouls, the black site scientists, the guilty, the architects, the people who'd built the machine and profited from the cruelty and knew exactly what was in Sub-Level 9. But also, the woman at the coffee cart in the lobby, the union electricians rewiring the 44th floor, the janitors, the interns who'd taken the Vought job because it was a job and their student loans didn't care that their employer was evil, the security guard who'd wet himself in the basement and lived, Marcus something, back at his post now because Vought didn't give you the day off for surviving a massacre. 4,000 people, some of them monsters, most of them just people, standing inside a building with a logo on it. On the morning a thing that ended cruelty decided the building itself was the cruelty. It won't tell the difference, said. Butcher, it can't. It doesn't sort people into guilty and innocent. It sorts them into the thing it ends and the thing it doesn't, and everybody in that building is wearing the same lanyard. He was already moving, gathering gear. The paralegal in the burning building, the Slayer went past her to get to Homelander. It'll go past 4,000 of them to get to whatever it thinks the company is. Except the company isn't a person. The company's the building, and everyone in it. There's no him to kill. So it'll just keep going, floor by floor, until there's no more cruelty because there's no more Vought, because there's no more anybody. So we let it, Butcher said. He said it the way he'd said good on the rooftop, flat, testing, and turned on him fully now, and Huey, back from the burning building, soot-streaked, a bandage on one arm, having pulled 11 people out of the bottom 3 floors before the fire crews took over. Huey turned on him too, and even Frenchie and Kimiko had gone still, and for a moment the whole crew was just looking at Billy Butcher, and Butcher looked back at all of them, and something in his face was struggling. Say it then, Butcher said. Go on. All of you. Say the thing. You know the thing, said quietly. I want to hear one of you say it out loud, 'cause I've been chasing this. A way to kill Homelander. A way to burn Vought to the ground. For years. And here it is. Walking up the street. And it's gonna do the whole job in an afternoon. Homelander's finished. Publicly. He ran on live telly. He's done. And now the thing's gonna walk into that tower and do to Vought what Vaught's done to this whole country for 80 years. And every scientist and every boardroom ghoul and every one of the bastards who built the machine is gonna get exactly what they've got coming. Butcher's voice had risen, and there was something raw under it. Something that had been raw for a very long time. So say it. Tell me why I should stop the best thing that's ever happened to us. Because the coffee cart lady didn't build the machine, Huey said. Butcher looked at him. You want to talk about who's got it coming? Fine, Huey said. The scientists in the basement. Edgar, Ashley, the board, Sage. Sure. Make the list. I'll help you make the list. God knows I've wanted half of them dead. But the list isn't 4,000 people, Butcher. The list isn't the electrician on 44 who's got no idea what's in the basement. It isn't the intern who's 22 and needed the health insurance. It isn't the security guard who nearly died down there this morning and came back to work because he's got a kid with braces. You know how I know that guy's story? Huey's voice cracked. Because it's my story. It's your story. Before Robin. Before any of this. Everybody in that building is somebody who took a job. That's the whole crime. And you want to let a machine that can't tell the difference walk in there and end all of them, because a few of them earned it? That's not justice, Butcher. That's just Homelander's math with a different face on it. There's people in the building, so what? You said it yourself 2 blocks ago. You said you weren't him. A beat. Not all the way. Not yet. The words hung there. And watched Billy Butcher, the man who hated soups with a purity that had cost him everything. The man who'd wanted this exact weapon his whole life. Watched him stand at the crossroads he'd spent years insisting didn't exist. Because this was the dilemma the whole thing had been driving toward. Not can we kill Homelander. They'd gotten that. They'd watched it happen, near enough. The dilemma was uglier and older, and it was the one the boys had always secretly been about. When you finally get the weapon that wins, and the weapon can't be aimed, and winning means becoming the thing you fought, do you pull the trigger anyway? Butcher's whole life said yes. Butcher's whole life was yes, was ends and means. Was the wife he'd lost, and the hate that had filled the hole. Was every ugly thing he'd done, and told himself was worth it. Yes was easy. Yes was the man he'd built. No, Butcher said. It came out of him like a tooth, like something torn. No. Bloody, no. He dragged a hand down his face. Not 4,000. Not the coffee cart. I want Homelander dead, and I want Vought burned. And I want every bastard who built the machine to see it coming. But I want it. His jaw worked. I want it aimed. I spent all day telling you it's a weapon. Weapons kill what you point 'em at. Well, nobody's pointing this one. It's pointing itself. And it's pointing itself at a building full of people whose only crime is a lanyard. And if I let that happen, 'cause it's convenient, then Huey's right. I'm just Homelander with a better excuse. He looked up, and his eyes were wet and furious. So, congratulations, you soft bastards. You've talked me into the single stupidest thing I've ever done, which is getting between an unstoppable killing machine and the company I hate most in the world. How do we stop a thing that can't be stopped? And into the silence, Kimiko signed, slow and deliberate so they'd all catch it, and Frenchie translated, and his voice was quiet. She says, Frenchie said, you do not stop it. She says she knows this, because she was it, and no one stopped her. She was stopped by only one thing. He watched her hands. She says, someone reached the person inside the weapon. Someone treated the weapon like it was a person, when everyone else treated it like a weapon. And the person inside, the person the makers thought they had burned out, the person was still there, small, buried, but there. Frenchie's throat moved. She says, it does not fight like there is no one inside. She was wrong before. She looked again. She says, there is something inside it, something that let a frightened man in a basement live, when it had no reason to. Something that went after Homelander, the source, and not the crowd cheering him. It sorts. A pure machine does not sort. It ends everything. This one chooses. Kimiko's hands stilled. Frenchie finished, barely above a whisper. She says, "It is not asking us to stop it. It is asking us, whoever made it, whatever made it, it is asking someone to tell it what is worth ending, and no one ever has. So it decides alone, and a thing that decides alone, forever, with no one to tell it enough." She says that is the loneliest thing she has ever seen, and she knows, because it was her, and the only thing that saved her was that someone finally said enough. The rooftop was silent. 2 blocks away, the armored figure reached the base of Vought Tower, and stood before the great glass doors, and the tiny fleeing shapes of 4,000 people were visible now, pouring out of every exit, a stampede of lanyards, and above them, the tower gleamed in the morning sun, and the Slayer looked up at it, up the whole 100 stories of manufactured cruelty, and drew a weapon that hummed with a light that was not of this world. "So somebody's gotta go down there," said slowly, understanding, hating it, "and be the person who says enough." Butcher was already climbing over the parapet toward the fire escape. "Yeah," he said, not looking back, his voice gone strange and quiet, and almost tender, the voice of a man walking toward the last thing he'd ever expected to do. "Yeah, and it's gonna have to be the one bastard here who understands exactly what it's like, to lose the person you were, and let the hate drive, and burn the whole world down 'cause it's easier than stopping." He dropped onto the fire escape and looked up at them one last time, and would remember the look for the rest of his life. "Takes a monster to talk to a monster, don't it? Right then. Wish me luck." And Billy Butcher went down toward the tower, alone, to stand between the unkillable thing and 4,000 people, and tell it the one word no one had ever said to it. Homelander came back. Of course he came back. That was the thing should have predicted and didn't. The variable sage had built her whole timeline around, and everyone else had forgotten in the terrible gravity of the tower. Homelander had fled, yes, but Homelander could not stay fled, because Homelander had watched himself lose on live television, and the frightened boy inside the god could not survive that. It had to be undone. It had to be unmade. And there was only one way to unmake a public humiliation for a creature like Homelander, and that was to fly back and win, in front of the same cameras, no matter what it cost, no matter who died, because the alternative, living in a world that had seen him thrown through a building, was, to Homelander, not living at all. So he came back. He came screaming down out of the sky over Vought Tower at the exact moment Butcher reached the ground and the Slayer raised its otherworldly weapon toward the doors, and he hit the Slayer from above with everything he had, driving it away from the tower, into the plaza, into the open, and the two of them went down together in a tangle of blood-colored armor and red, white, and blue, and the ground cracked, and the final fight, the real one, the one with nothing held back, began. And Butcher, who had climbed down 40 floors of fire escape to talk to a killing machine, found himself instead standing at the edge of a plaza watching 2 titans try to end each other, with 4,000 fleeing people at his back and no way to reach the thing he'd come to reach. It was not like the parking structure. In the parking structure, Homelander had been playing. Cruel, theatrical, a cat with a thing he assumed was a mouse. This was not play. This was a cornered animal that had been shown its own death and had decided to spend everything, all of it, every ounce of the most powerful body on Earth, on refusing that death. He fought the way he'd never had to fight, because he'd never faced anything that made him. He blasted and hammered and tore, and for the first time the Slayer's unhurried patience broke, because Homelander at full desperate output was, realized with a lurch, genuinely catastrophically powerful. The single strongest thing this world had ever produced, no longer holding back to preen, no longer performing for a crowd, just a god trying with his whole being to not die. The Slayer took a hit that cratered the plaza, took heat vision poured continuous into the scorched visor for 4 full seconds, 5, 6, took a blow to the chest that felt in his teeth from 100 yards. The armor cracked further, that skull and chevron mark split down the middle. And for one terrible moment thought, they all thought, it's not enough. It's finally not enough. Homelander's going to. And then the Slayer stopped taking it. There was a moment. would try to describe it for years, and never manage. The armored thing, driven to one knee for the second time that day, Homelander's fists raining down, Homelander screaming into its face the same broken thing he'd screamed in the crater, and the Slayer went still under the assault, the way water goes still before it freezes, and something changed in the quality of it, and understood that everything before this moment, the parking structure, the rooftop, the whole day of casual, unhurried, world-ending violence, had been the Slayer holding back. Because a thing that runs on rage and never runs out had, until this exact moment, never once been given a reason to spend all of it. Homelander had just given it one. The Slayer caught the next descending fist. Not blocked, caught, closed its cracked gauntlet around Homelander's hand, and heard, even from 100 yards, even over the sirens and the screaming, the sound of the most powerful hand on earth being crushed inside a grip it could not break. Homelander shrieked, and the Slayer rose, up off its knee, up to its full height, hauling the god upright by his ruined hand, and it began, methodically, without haste, without mercy, without hate, to take Homelander apart. Did not watch all of it. He would admit that. There are things a man doesn't need on the inside of his eyes, and the end of Homelander was one of them. But he watched enough. He watched the god of the manufactured sky, the thing that had murdered a building full of people that morning to prove he wasn't afraid, the thing that had run, the thing an entire nation had worshipped. He watched Homelander finally get, in full, delivered by an unfeeling machine that did not even have the decency to hate him, exactly what he had spent his whole life doing to everyone weaker than himself. No mercy, none. The Slayer did to Homelander what Homelander had done to Denise Okafor and 1,000 others, and it did it slow, and it did it thorough, and the last thing Homelander ever did on this earth was cry. Actually cry. The frightened boy fully surfaced at last, alone, unloved, unmade, and beg, in a small voice, for someone, anyone, to save him. No one did. The god of the manufactured sky died in a cracked plaza in front of the cameras he'd lived for, and the nation that had worshipped him watched it happen, and there was a silence over the city, and it was the specific silence of 8 million people discovering all at once that their god had always been mortal, and that the thing that killed him had done it as easily as closing a door. And then the Slayer turned toward Vought Tower, still standing, the doors, the 4,000, Butcher. Its work with Homelander was done, the loudest cruelty ended, and now the sorting turned to the machine that made him, the glass tower full of lanyards, and it took a step toward the doors, its weapons still humming, and the frightened stampede at its back surged, and MM's heart stopped, because there was no one between the unkillable thing and the 4,000, except one man. Butcher stepped into its path. He didn't raise a weapon. That was the thing saw, the thing that undid him. Billy Butcher, who had come down here armed, who had spent his whole life meeting force with force, dropped his gun, let it clatter on the cracked stone, and he walked, empty-handed, into the path of a thing that had just torn apart the strongest being on earth, and he stopped in front of it, close, closer than Homelander had dared, and he looked up into the scorched and splitting visor, and watching, could not hear what he said at first, and then the wind turned and he could. "I know what you are," Butcher said. His voice was not the voice he used on frightened animals. It was lower than that, and stripped, and terribly gentle, and it was a voice had never once heard from him in all their years. "I know exactly what you are, 'cause I'm the same bloody thing. Lost the person I was a long time back. Let the hate take the wheel. Told myself every terrible thing I did was worth it, 'cause of what I was fighting. And you know what?" He took a breath. "It never ends. That's the trick. Nobody tells you. You end the thing in front of you, and there's always another, 'cause the world's full of them. And you can walk into that building and end 4,000 people, 'cause some of them are guilty. And then there'll be another building, and another, and it'll never once feel like enough. 'Cause the ending's not the point. It was never the point. It's just the thing you do so you don't have to feel the person you lost." The Slayer stood over him. The weapon hummed. It did not fire. It did not move. And behind the splitting visor, the two suggestions of eyes, the eyes that had stared into hell until hell blinked, were fixed on Billy Butcher, and they were sorting, realized, sorting the way they'd sorted everything, and Butcher was standing in the exact spot where 6 operators and A-Train and the strongest man alive, had all been sorted into the thing it ends. "You did the job," Butcher said. "The one you came for. The worst thing in this city. The loudest, cruelest, biggest bastard. He's done. You did that. And it was righteous. And I've wanted it for years. And I'll not pretend otherwise." He swallowed. "But the building behind me's not the job. It's a coffee cart and an electrician and a scared kid who needed the health insurance. And if you walk through 'em to get at the few that earned it, then you're not ending cruelty anymore, mate. You're just being it. And I reckon somewhere in there, under all that armor, there's still enough of a person left to know the difference. 'Cause you let a frightened man live in that basement. You didn't have to. Nothing that's only a weapon does that." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "So here it is, the thing nobody ever said to me, and I wish to God they had. 40 years, and 100 graves ago." Butcher spread his empty hands. "Enough," he said. "You've done enough. Stop." And the whole world held its breath. For 3 seconds, the Slayer did not move. Counted them. He counted them the way you count the space between lightning and thunder. The way you count anything when counting is the only thing keeping you from screaming. 1. The weapon humming in its cracked gauntlet, angled at the doors, at the 4,000, at Butcher standing empty-handed in the path. 2. The scorched visor fixed on the one small profane man who had walked unarmed into the place where gods had died. 3. And on the 3rd second, the humming stopped. The Slayer lowered the weapon. It was such a small motion. After a day of impossible violence, after the basement and the parking structure and the rooftop and the plaza, after A-Train and 6 operators and Homelander himself unmade in front of the world, the thing that saved 4,000 lives was a single armored arm lowering a few degrees until the weapon pointed at the cracked stone instead of the tower. That was all. That was everything. Butcher didn't move. Didn't dare. He just stood there with his empty hands spread, looking up. And was too far away to see his face, but he didn't need to. Because he knew. He'd known Billy Butcher for years. And he knew that whatever was happening on that face right now was a thing Butcher would never speak of and never forget. The moment a monster looked at a monster, and one of them chose, for the first time, to be something else. The Slayer looked at Butcher a moment longer, then it looked past him, at the tower, at the streaming crowds, at the whole glass monument to manufactured cruelty that it had come within one step of ending, and it did the thing it had done in the basement, with the frightened man by the door. The thing a pure weapon does not do. It chose not to. It turned away from Vought Tower. Let out a breath he'd been holding. It felt like all day. Beside him on the parapet, Huey made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. Kimiko had gone very still, and when glanced at her, her flat, unreadable face was wet, and she was watching the armored figure turn from the tower with an expression he'd never seen on her. Recognition, and grief, and something that might have been hope. Someone said enough. Her hands had told them. And the person inside was still there. She'd been right. She'd been right because she'd lived it. And now she'd watched it happen to something even she had been afraid of. And understood that of all of them, Kimiko was the only one who fully grasped what they'd just witnessed. Not a weapon disarmed, but a person, buried under armor and rage and 10,000 years of ending things, allowed for one moment to be a person again. The Slayer walked back through the plaza, past the crater where Homelander had died, and it stopped there, over the wreckage of the god it had unmade, and it looked down at what remained for a long moment, and then it did something that would turn over in his mind for the rest of his life. It reached down, and it closed the staring eyes of the thing it had killed, a small, strange, almost tender gesture, from a machine that ran on rage, and understood that even for Homelander, even for the worst of them, the ending had not been hate. It had never been hate. It had been the grim, sorrowful function of a thing that ends cruelty, doing the only thing it knew how to do, in a universe that had never once given it another job. Then it straightened, and it walked away, out of the plaza, into the wounded city, alone. Vought did not survive the morning. Not really. Oh, the company would limp on for a while. Corporations are hard to kill, harder than gods. But the thing that had made Vought, the 80-year spell, the manufactured worship, the belief, that died at 9:14 on live television and got buried in a cracked plaza an hour later, You cannot sell a god the whole world watched cry and beg and die. You cannot put worship back in the bottle once 8 million people have seen the wires. Sister Sage understood this before anyone, which was why Sister Sage was already gone. The smartest person alive had looked at the numbers, seen no version where the machine recovered, and simply left, walking out of the tower during the chaos, with a bag and a plan, off to be the smartest person alive, somewhere the cameras couldn't find her. Ashley resigned by end of day and drank herself into a version of peace. Grant from legal spent the next 2 years in front of congressional committees explaining what Aperture had been, and Marcus Reeve, the security guard who lived, testified about the basement, and cried on the stand, and got his daughter's braces paid for by a book deal, and never once slept a full night again. The boys did not celebrate. That surprised MM. Later, looking back, they'd won. They'd gotten the thing they'd chased for years, Homelander dead, and Vought gutted, and the whole rotten machine coming apart, and there was no celebration in it, because they'd learned something in the watching that took the sweetness out. They'd learned what Kimiko had always known, and what Butcher had finally said out loud, that the difference between the weapon and the man wielding it is only ever the presence of someone willing to say enough, and that most of the horror in the world comes from the fact that, for most weapons, no one ever does. Butcher didn't talk about what he'd said in the plaza. Not that night, not ever. But MM noticed things in the weeks after. Noticed that Butcher's hate had a different quality to it now. Quieter, more tired. Like a man who'd looked at his own reflection wearing armor and hadn't liked what he'd nearly become. Noticed that when Huey wanted to run toward a burning building, Butcher stopped saying there's always people in the building and started, sometimes, running too. It wasn't redemption. Billy Butcher was too far gone and too honest for redemption. But it was something. It was a man who'd stood in front of a killing machine, recognized himself, and chosen, barely once, to be the thing that says stop. As for the Slayer, it was never found. There were sightings, for a while, the way there are always sightings. A power surge in a black site 3 states over, that went dark and quiet. Its staff found alive and its equipment found ruined. A cult of V-dealers who turned up dead in a warehouse, with a skull and chevron mark scorched into the wall. It moved through the wreckage of the world Vought had built, ending the cruelties that were too buried for cameras to reach, and it did not go back through any door, because there was still, MM supposed, a great deal in this world worth ending, and because a thing that runs on rage and never runs out does not get to rest until the work is done. But it never walked through another building full of lanyards. Whatever Butcher had reached in the plaza, whatever small buried person still lived under all that armor, it held, it sorted. Now, more carefully, it chose. And somewhere in a city that had finally stopped worshipping its monsters, the people slept a little easier, knowing that the worst of them was gone, and did not know, and would never know, that they'd been spared not by a hero, but by a monster who'd been told, once, by another monster, that enough was enough. The truth, in the end, was the thing Vought had spent 80 years and 11 figures burying, that there are no clean heroes, and no gods, and that the line between the weapon and the wielder is thinner than anyone wants to believe. Homelander was a product, the Seven were a product, even the worship was a product, manufactured and sold and mainlined into a nation that wanted, more than anything, to believe that someone up there was stronger and better and looking out for them. Something came through a door that could not be bought, branded or buried, and it showed them, in one brutal morning, exactly what their gods were made of. Not divinity, not heroism, just power, and the lie told to make power lovable. And when it was done, it did not ask for a statue, or a contract, or a name. It simply walked back into the dark it had come to clean, one deliberate step at a time, ending what needed ending, sorting the guilty from the innocent with a care that no god Vought ever built had bothered to learn, because someone, once, in a cracked plaza full of the dead, had finally treated the weapon like a person, and the person, it turned out, had been there the whole time,